Thanks, Spencer. So hi, my name is Vance Crowe, and as Spencer said, I run a company called Legacy Interviews, where I sit down with individuals and couples to share their life stories so that future generations can know their family history. And we'll get to that. What I wanted to first do is, because I'm an outsider, I'm not in the Ag Ventures group, I'm not a farmer, I'm an entrepreneur, but in a very different space, that I thought that it would be worthwhile for me to make a couple of observations about what I've seen here today. You see, I have a podcast, and through this podcast, I have an opportunity to go and talk with some of the most interesting scientists in the world, people that are doing cutting-edge things. And I, even though I live in St. Louis, Missouri, you start to get that kind of coastal mentality, that all of the exciting big things that are happening around the coast. I can tell you that I spend so much of my time looking at what is the cutting edge, but then coming here, I was totally blown away by some of the technologies that you're investing in. I'd never heard of being able to have a plant express that it is about to get sick. I think that these self-driving planters, like, this is a dream that people have had, but you've got it right here. I think the stock cropper work that Zach Smith is working on, just incredible things, and it's really amazing when you get out into the world and you see what's really going on. It can totally change your perspective. One perspective that I've had changed is I was always under the impression that St. Louis and Northern Iowa were on the same calendar. But after having come here and experienced what March 27th is right now, March 27th in St. Louis, Missouri, it's 70 degrees and beautiful and warm. And I'm coming to the very clear realization that you guys are in like January 85th right now. But you only learn these things when you come and you experience it. When you actually get out, you do those field trips, you check out, hey, this planter worked great when we were in Northern Iowa, but how does it stand up in Tennessee, or what's going to happen in the soils? So just getting out and seeing things allows you to understand the world in a deeper way, and you get to encounter things that you didn't expect and you didn't understand. Now, you have had the opportunity to have some really brilliant minds come up and speak, but I think there's something really interesting about coming together at an event like what you're at right now. So because any one of us, anywhere in the United States, almost anywhere in the world, can pull out your phone and you can watch the greatest speaker on a subject in the world. You could take the best physics class at MIT or at Stanford. You could be having people talking to you about just the most minute and tiny detail because they have this expertise. So it's funny to think, what is the value of having a speaker in front of you? Well, right now, the value is not that speaker has some huge knowledge. You can go get knowledge anywhere. To me, the value of seeing someone in person or to watch these lightning experiences of the founders talking about their businesses is that it allows you not just to see it watching it by yourself, but to see what happens when other people see this. What questions do they ask? How do they interact with what they're learning about? And that in and of itself completely separates you from that experience of looking at your computer screen by yourself. You're getting to experience this with other people. And I think that this is very important because all of us know that the future is totally uncertain. This is not profound, but maybe the profound thing about the future is it seems like change is happening faster and faster and faster. In fact, I've heard it described on my podcast as we are now living in the age of acceleration, right? It will never get slower than it is right now. And so how do you handle this? How do you predict what you should do? Not only what should I invest in for my own operation or so that I get a return on this investment, but what's the world going to look like after the next election? How is this summer going to treat us based on the weather? All of the chaotic things that you can't know what's going to happen. It's very interesting to think, well, what can you do to prepare yourself? And when Spencer invited me to come talk with this group, I went looking for something that might be valuable and interesting and different to talk about, and I encountered this quote right here. Not right here, I've got to turn my clicker on. Right here. And it's by this man named Joseph Neville, right? This is Chamberlain, I'm sorry. His brother, Neville Chamberlain, was exactly who you know of, but this guy was an ambassador traveled all over the world, was given the Nobel Peace Prize for having negotiated in complex environments like India and China. And one time in one of his speeches, he said, the Chinese have a very a powerful curse that they can tell people with a smile on their face. And it is, may you live in interesting times. Why is that a curse? Well, if we think about it, good times, they might be fun, they might be nice, but they're not that interesting. Good times are those times where what you expected would happen, happens. Things get interesting when you don't know what's going to happen, or when you thought something was going to happen and it didn't, right? And you live in these chaotic moments, these times where you can't predict what's going on. So it's kind of funny. It's one of those barbs that you could give somebody. I hope you live in interesting times, meaning I hope you've got some kind of tough and wild times ahead of you. Now, when I encountered this, I always think this is very interesting if you can ever find a cultural saying from a completely different culture, the Chinese in this case, and it totally converts over to a group of farmers in northern Iowa 100 years after he had heard this quote. And the reason I think that's so interesting is because if you find a quote or a curse or a saying or an image that can transcend from one generation or one culture all the way across to the future, well, you've really hit on something deep, something archetypal, something really deeply human. And those are the things that are good to pay attention to because they've stood the test of time. Now, for me, one of the most profound experiences I ever had was when I was shown this symbol and I had the meaning of it changed before my eyes. I don't know what you perceive when you see this, but I grew up small town central Illinois, and I had always been taught this is the yin and the yang. And the yin and the yang represent good and evil and those opposing forces. And to me, that was good enough. I didn't need to know anything more about it. But one day I encountered a man who pointed out, no, this is actually the symbol of the duality of life. That there is always a tension in everything that we do. And the thing that he pointed out is the people in the Asian cultures that really embrace this look at the white not necessarily as good, but instead as order. Order are all of those things that you know and understand. So what is the opposite of order? Well, the opposite of order is chaos. Chaos is all of those things that you don't know, you don't understand. You don't have any comprehension of what's going to happen when you go into the chaos. Now, for many people, the order is the most comfortable place that you can be. If you're in farming, order is very important. You put things in straight lines. You make sure that you understand what are the variables that you have to control in order to be able to make this plant grow as high as possible, even though there's an almost undescribable amount of variables. But the challenge with order is that it isn't actually naturally good. Order just means it's understood. It's something that we can get our arms around. We can really know how to navigate. The problem with order is that if you stay on the ordered side too long, that becomes tyrannical. You can't change. So if you want to have a balanced life, this symbol is telling us you need to also understand the chaos, the unknown. And in order to discover something new and valuable, it can't come from the creative, it has to come from the unknown. And the unknown scares us because we can't predict what will happen. And this is where those interesting times come. And I think the people in this room are uniquely positioned to understand order and chaos in a way that maybe people living in the cities can't. Because you're entrepreneurs. One of my favorite signs I've ever seen on social media, it was this guy standing up at a factory and the sign said, "We don't do this because it was easy. We did it because we thought it would be easy." Right? You get into a venture, you think you know how it's going to work, you think you understand how things are going to play out, but every step you take, you start to realize, no, this didn't work out at all the way that I thought it would. But this is valuable, and learning how to embrace the chaos allows you to find new ideas, new people, new ways of thinking that will allow you to survive in this age of acceleration. Now, I think everyone, when they think about it, can remember back to a time when you were in chaos. And when I say you were in chaos, this doesn't necessarily mean that things were going horribly wrong, or that you were sad, or that something awful happened to you. It just means that you stepped into a place where you thought you knew where you were, but then you discover, I'm not where I thought I was at all. For me, my example of going into the chaos was I had been when I had grown up in small town central Illinois, the only thing I wanted to do was get out of my small town. So I had baled hay and walked beans, but I didn't think of that as food. There was no option there for me. I grew up in town. So all I wanted to do was get out into the world and see things. So I went out and I worked for a PR. After going to college, I worked for a PR firm. I became a deckhand on a ship. I joined the U.S. Peace Corps. I worked in community public radio. I ultimately got a graduate degree in negotiations and went to work for the World Bank. Now, I was doing these things because all I wanted to do was go out and see the world and try and do good and find a place for myself. And so when I had gotten married and I'm living in St. Louis and I had an opportunity to interview for a job at Monsanto, I thought this was hilarious. Because if there's one thread that connects all those different jobs that I described, it's that all of those people that are connected to those various organizations and regions of the world, they all know one thing, or knew one thing, and that was that Monsanto was evil. So was large-scale agriculture. So when I had the opportunity, the invitation for me to interview for this job, the Director of Millennial Engagement, well, not only did I think that the job title was funny, but I thought, well, if I accept the invitation to the job, I'll get to go tour that place. And who doesn't want to see inside of North Korea? So I took the invitation, and I go to Monsanto. And now, I don't know exactly what I was picturing, but as soon as I got onto that campus, I was immediately disappointed. How many of you here have been to the Monsanto campus? Yeah, so a few. So I don't know what you were imagining, but what I was imagining was that there was an 80-story building with black storm clouds, and everybody would be wearing Matrix-style sunglasses and suits, right? So I'm horribly disappointed when I get there, and it's a 2-story kind of college campus with a fountain, and the woman that greets me at the front door's name is Holly, right? And she invites me in. So I don't know if any of you have ever interviewed for a job that you don't want, but it's about as much fun as you can have. Because you're interviewing at this place, right? And they don't know you. You aren't going to have to see these people again. And so I sat down to do the interviews. And keep in mind, this was a big job. They were trying to hire a person that would go out into the world and figure out, why do all these young people hate us? And so I was interviewing for this job, and every time they would ask me a question, like, what's your preferred management style? I'd say, well, I like to get into work early. Why are you suing farmers to death? Or they'd say, how do you like to work in a group? Oh, I really like team efforts, da-da-da-da. Why are you dumping all these poisons into the Mississippi River? And now, they did 7 hours of interviews, and I did this to them for 7 straight hours. And it was a fascinating experience because they were genuinely answering the questions back to me about their own perspectives. So when we get all the way done with the panels of interviews, Holly comes back into the room. She sits across the desk from me, and she says, okay, now we're pretty well wrapped up. Before we get done, do you have any questions for me? And I said, yeah, you're training a person to do this job, to go defend a company that the world thinks is literally evil. How are you going to train a person to do this job? Well, Holly, she paused, and what she said next changed the trajectory of my life. This is the moment that I went into the chaos. Because what she said was, whoever we hire for this job, we're going to train them based on what their skill set is, what they're good at. And since you've been so curious, I think what I would do is write a list of 50 people from throughout the company, chemists, breeders, geneticists, farmers, attorneys, communications people, and have you go sit down and talk with each one of them for an hour. And then after you're done with that list of 50 people, then you and I will sit down and we'll figure out what you do and don't know. And then I'll write another list of 50 people for you to go talk with. And in this moment, a light bulb goes off in my head because I realize these crazy people, if they hire me for this job, they're going to let me run around and ask anyone anything at all. And so there's only two possibilities that could come from here. At least this is what I thought. What I thought was you're going to discover one of two things. Either they are as evil as everybody says that they are, and now I'm going to get to learn all about it and go write the greatest tell-all book of all time. Or you're going to discover that what you thought you knew wasn't true. And in fact, we are maybe growing food more bountifully, more efficiently than we ever have before in the history of time, and yet people are upset and even angry about how their food is being grown. So I went in just the blink of an eye from not wanting that job to wanting that job. And I ended up getting the job and spent the next 5 years trying to learn and understand why is it that people know what they know? How do they learn that Monsanto is evil or that farming is bad? And then if you wanted to change that, what would you need to do? And I think that there are some lessons that I've been able to pull away from this experience that are valuable to a group of investors and entrepreneurs and really anyone that's thinking about how do I get ready for an uncertain world. So let's talk a little bit about where new ideas come from. And now I don't mean this like the epiphany of a founder that just sits in, has this idea and they've got to fix it. I'm saying, where do cultural ideas come from? How is it that there are some ideas that everyone just knows are true? But then when you go dig into it, there's no factuality to it at all. Many of you have experienced this with ag, of course, but why is it that people know these things? Well, I went through and worked for many, many years, actually, with a group of people to try and figure out how can we understand where ideas come from. And what we came up with was what we call the well-actually graph. The well-actually graph describes how ideas diffuse into society. So imagine on the x-axis you have all ideas have some amount of value. And on the other axis we have the number of people that know an idea. So imagine for a moment we're hacking away through the genome of corn and ping, we discover something totally new, something nobody's ever seen before. The value of knowing that idea is really high. The number of people that know that idea is really low. But now let's not talk about it just as a discovery with genomics. Let's zoom the camera lens back and say it's any idea that's out in the world, right, like a stock tip. As more people begin to know about this idea, the value of knowing it first drops dramatically as more and more people learn about this idea. So you can tell that as you go across this graph, we're not talking about just a few people, we're talking about millions of people. So I always mark the point on the graph when I get a phone call from my mother who says, Vance, I was watching CNN or I was watching Fox and I heard this thing about agriculture. To my mother, CNN, Fox, these mainstream news outlets, this is where news happens. This is where you get your information from. But anybody that's in here knows that if you're getting your stock tips from Fox Business, it's way too late. That information has gone too far. And if you're trying to push back on the narrative about, say, modern agriculture, if you're waiting until the ideas have reached my mother, it's incredibly expensive to try and reach my mother because it's not just me trying to talk about my ideas, it's Tide detergent and Toyota cars and everybody trying to get her attention. One time I was showing this to an old grain trader, and I was describing where Monsanto was going to change our strategy for how we interacted with people. And he came up, I was doing it on a dry erase board, and he takes the marker out of my hands. His name's Jim Tobin, if any of you know him. And he says, you know what, Vance, you're right. Monsanto, we wait until the ideas are all the way down the graph before we start to interact with them. But when I think about it, actually, we wait until the ideas get way out here to react to them. And so what our goal was how do you move back up that graph? How do you find ideas before they're known by, say, the mainstream news or what everybody knows? So what we started doing was trying to go back up this graph. And we started to find smaller outlets, places that were not as big or as important, and we started trying to interact with them. In today's day and age, maybe instead of going to, say, like Joe Rogan's podcast, now you're talking about Lex Friedman. Or if you're talking about agriculture podcasts, maybe you're now talking about Farm for Profit and then Barn Talk, or maybe the podcast made by John Kemp, the Amish farmer, right? What you notice is as you go back up this graph, the audiences get smaller and smaller. But the depth with which people want to know things gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So I always mark this point on the graph. Oh, I'm one head. I always mark the point on the graph, and it's an experience that I'm sure all of you have had before. You know when you're at a party and everybody's talking about what's going on in the news of the day, and there's always that one person that's sitting at the party listening to what everybody's saying, and they wait for a break in the conversation and they go, well, actually, and then they jump in and they tell you what they know about that subject. In fact, I think there might be some well, actually people in this room here. Our goal when we were working with culture change was to try and go up that graph as high as we could. Try and find the people or the groups of people that were talking about things in a very different way. They weren't concerned with whether or not the mainstream could understand it, whether it made sense to them. They were just working on things that mattered to them. And by doing that, they started to create a smaller and smaller group of people that could hang there, which is exactly what's going on in this room right here, particularly with entrepreneurs, right? So what I want to talk about is, how do you make sure that you get yourself up the graph so that you can find and know about ideas before other people? Now, when you bring together a group of people that are all focused on a single specific topic, the more they work on that topic, the more they're studying it, the more they're engaged in it, they start to form a tribe. And those tribes are the types of people that share the same norms. They share the same kind of concepts. You kind of all understand who are the top people in this group, who are the people that we can ignore, what are the ways that we behave, how do we argue with one another. Tribes are exactly what form around new ways of thinking so that they can get developed. They can be something that builds, and then it goes down the rest of that graph so that other people can hear about it. And I think that this is a very important thing for you to be aware of, and in fact, to actually cultivate and think about your own tribe. Not just the tribe of other entrepreneurs and other people that are investors like you right now, but what other tribes are you a part of? Because the company you keep will track exactly with the types of ideas that you encounter. Whether or not you hear about things before other people, whether or not you understand what the context of any information that you hear out in the world is. And so the company you keep really matters. So what I want you guys to do right now is there's paper somewhere around, because I'm going to ask you to write something down, because writing it down will actually change your answer. Get out a piece of paper and a pen. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down a list of the 5 people you spend the most time listening to, interacting with, right? Communicating with. Write down that list of 5 people. And there's no hold barred. It might be my wife, my daughter. But really think about it. Who are the 5 people that you spend the most time with? Now, as you're thinking about it, I want to throw a little wrinkle in there. Because it's not just the people that are responding back to you that you spend time with. Because how many people in this room listen to hours and hours of podcasts, right? Or radio shows, or television? Your mind cannot distinguish between whether or not you're sitting and talking with a person or whether that person is just talking at you. And so those people have just as much influence on you. If you're spending an hour a day with a podcaster that puts something out every day, that's a lot of time. So do you guys all have your list of 5? Okay, now what I want you to do is take a look at that list and ask yourself, who on this list really understands things at a deep level? This person doesn't have to know about everything, just maybe in the domain that you care about. They are the one that's really deeply thinking about things. Is there anyone in here that doesn't have a person that shows up on their list like that? Anybody? It's okay. There's no judgment. That's great. That means you all have somebody in your tribe, your group of people, the 5 people that kind of make up who you are and where you get ideas. They all have, you at least have one person that thinks about things deeply. Now for a harder question. Who's always out there trying new ideas? Do you have somebody on your list that's experimenting, trying things that other people don't think will work, failing? How many of you have a person like this on your list? A few hands. How many of you are this person on the list? Yeah, that's good. I think this would be a very different talk to a different group of people. All right, I want to ask you the final one, and I think this one is maybe the toughest, right? Which is, who do you disagree with the most? I liked that the professor mentioned the Big Five personality test, because one of those is agreeableness, right? So out of the five, one of them, agreeableness, is how much do you like to just have people get along? Would you rather have them get along? Or do you want to find the right answer and you are willing to have the crowd and everybody else be disrupted because you want to make sure you get this thing figured out? Well, the problem is, if you have entirely agreeable people, yes, you all get along, but nobody's willing to go out into the chaos and kind of shake things up. So how many of you have somebody on your list that you really, really respect, but you disagree with all the time? That's great. Because that is one of the only ways that you can measure how likely am I to encounter ideas that I don't already know and agree with, is that you are spending time with people that share ideas with you that you don't agree with, that you don't like. So much of our culture is set up so that we only see ideas we like from people that we already get along with, that the number of ideas that we encounter that could change us, that could improve us, narrows and narrows and narrows. And if you want to be a person that's capable of being prepared for whatever's going to throw your way, you need to be around people that show you ideas that maybe you bristle, maybe you really dislike. And I would encourage you, if you're a podcast listener, you like listening to talk radio, definitely encounter ideas that are not comfortable. Because if you don't, then all you're doing is being fed ideas that are right on the edge of what you already know and believe. Well, what remains, right? In life, when we get into chaotic situations and we see, I don't really know what to do here, I don't really know what's going to happen, right? What remains are the people that we love and that we care about. And I left Monsanto after Bayer bought it, and I decided that I wanted to do something really different. And it's a long story on how I got here, but ultimately, instead of going out and talking about Monsanto, I started to realize that when I spoke with people, if they told me what they were really working on, if they told me what they really built throughout their life, if they talked about things that really mattered to them, we could have amazing conversations. So I started doing the podcast that I had in order to be able to continually be around new good ideas and share it and be able to continue to go out and give talks. But there was something different about talking with people about their personal lives. And so ultimately, I started this company called Legacy Interviews, where people sit down with me for either a couple of hours or an entire day, and we talk about the 5 areas of their life: their childhood, their career, marriage, parenting, and the wisdom that they've learned along the way. And I think something that's truly amazing happened when I was doing these conversations, because I began to realize that most people have spent most of their lives, myself included, really just trying to deal with all of the chaos around us. Right? We're so busy in our lives just trying to keep our heads above water, just trying to get kids to school, just trying to make it so we can manage all the taxes and the bureaucracies that we have to deal with in our businesses and the challenges that are facing us, that most of the time people go their whole lives never really thinking very much about what they've gone through. But now that I have a chance to sit down and do these legacy interviews, I realize that by telling stories about your life, by talking about what you went through, these people are able to revisit what was chaos and turn it into order by turning it into a story. Many, many people have sat down and talked with me about parts of their lives that they've never really gone back and looked at. And sometimes when they're doing it as a couple, they'll turn to each other and they'll be like, yeah, we got through that bankruptcy. I almost forgot that, right? Or we had a major problem with our children, a serious illness. And yet they had to just keep going in their lives, and they never had a chance to stop and look back and talk about what they're doing. And I now believe that storytelling is a critical part of our culture that we're losing now. And that it doesn't just harm the young people that aren't hearing the stories, it's actually keeping us, those of us that have lived these lives, from being able to have the chance to say, what did I go through? What was that? And when you bring those stories out about the past, that's where wisdom is born. Now, there's some really amazing research that's come out of Duke and Emory universities that show that young people that know their family history, that know who they are, where they came from, their legacy, even if the legacy isn't good, even if it contains major flaws, and even if they were adopted, so these are not their genetic family lines, those children that can identify their own family stories suffer from drug addiction, anxiety, and depression far less than the general population. And I believe this is because when we start telling our stories, when we start to know who we were, where we came from, it gives us an ability to know what we can face in the future. And so I want to take a little bit of time to talk about how do you get other people to talk about their lives with you? Because if you can get them to talk about their lives, if you can get them to think back on it, it can allow them to see the chaotic time that they went through, discover something new, tell you a story, and give you wisdom that will allow you to do something with it. When people come to my studio, I have a studio in St. Louis. People travel in from all over the United States and Canada to come and see it. Oftentimes, they've been thinking about telling their life stories for quite a while. And then when they get there and they see the cameras and the lights and that we're really doing it, they get a little nervous. And when people get nervous, sometimes they get a little hostile. Sometimes they get a little grumpy. Sometimes they start telling you things that you don't expect. And I didn't really expect this. I thought everyone wants to tell their life story. Everybody's going to enjoy this. This will be great. But I'm really high in extroversion, right? There are a lot of people that they're not. And so the experience of coming in to talk about their life stories makes them kind of clench up. And what I realized after doing this for a little while was that I could show them a painting hanging in the wall in my studio, and we could have a conversation and it would change it. And what I would say to them, we walk into the studio and I show them this painting and I ask them a very simple question. What do you see? I would ask you in this room, what do you see when you look at this painting? What's that? A rough life. What else do you see? Tired. What else? Old. These are very common answers. I often ask, what do you think she's doing? Seeds in her hands. What's that? Feeding the birds, right? That's a new one. I have asked hundreds of people this, and I very, very rarely get the same answer. Which is so interesting, right? We're all looking at the same painting, and like you all think, like I see what everybody else in this room sees. But the reality is, when I show people this, and I ask them what they see, something really amazing happens. They start talking. They can make observations about what they're seeing. And now when we sit down to start recording their interview, they've stopped thinking so much about themselves and their own stories, and they're just sharing with you. The reason I tell you this is I have done this hundreds of times, and I can tell you that if you're trying to get someone to talk with you and you're having trouble getting them to start, show them something that you've looked at together hundreds of times. It could be a barn, it could be a quilt, it could be something, an animal on your operation, and ask them, what do you see? And you will be completely floored by the answers that you'll get back. And once somebody starts talking, they'll tell you a lot more. So one of the questions that I really like to ask early on to people is a simple question. It doesn't even seem that deep, right? But what was one of the favorite foods that your mother made? Now, why do I like asking people this question? Well, it's because it immediately takes people back to their childhood. How many of you can have an answer to this question right now, right off the top of your head? Everybody, right? And there's something really interesting. When you start to ask people, tell me about this food that your mother made, and what you may get back is, well, my mom really hated to cook, right? And now we're having a conversation about that. Your mom didn't like to cook. What did that mean for your family? Or you might be, well, mom only cooked on these special occasions and she made this thing. And now you can start talking about what was the special occasion, why, where did it come from? And in your own family, if you're asking these questions, whether that's of your parents or of your children or of your grandchildren, you'll start to see that as soon as you take somebody back into their lives and they start exploring these experiences that they had, they'll start remembering things that they couldn't have recalled on their own. By asking people these questions, you allow them to look back on that chaotic time of their life. Childhood, as wonderful as it is, so much is changing, it's chaotic. You give them a way to anchor to it and share things about their lives so that they'll open up. Another question I love asking, particularly when we get into the career section, is, what was a time in your career when you got lucky? How many of you can think back on a time when you got lucky in your career? Maybe it wasn't that you made the best trade. Maybe it was that you encountered a mentor that stepped in and got you to do something you wouldn't have done. Maybe it was a time that you stopped down and checked on a piece of equipment, only to know, like, if I hadn't checked on that, it'd have been a real problem. One of the reasons I like this question is because it allows people to imagine different paths that their lives could have taken. And when they look back on their chaotic time and why they chose the path that they did, by allowing them to say, when did I get lucky? What happened in my career? It's a really powerful thing. It allows people to imagine what their lives could have been like. Another question, and this will be the last one I'll share today. This is one that I don't ask until we've built a rapport, until we've been talking for probably close to 2 hours at this point. And I ask a question, and I'll ask it of you right now. What was the most difficult lesson to learn that was the most valuable to know? What was the most difficult lesson to learn that was the most valuable to know? How many of you an idea comes to mind immediately? A few of you. How many of you need to think about that for a while? Yeah. I think that what's so interesting about this is that it allows people to look back on their lives and realize that those difficult things that they went through taught them things that allowed them to thrive later on in their lives. It might have been that, that you watched a parent suffer from some sort of substance abuse. It might have been something that I hear very frequently, more than I ever imagined, particularly from men. I wish that I would have known earlier that I could count on my wife to be my partner, that I could tell her things. Anybody have a guess what women often say to this question? Any guesses? What I hear from a lot of women, particularly when they're over the age of about 60, is they start to say, I wish it didn't take me so long to stop caring about what other people thought of me for so long. That's powerful, right? That is so powerful. And I want you to imagine yourself, at whatever age you are right now, imagine yourself watching a video of your great-great-grandmother telling you, I wish I hadn't worried so much about what other people thought of me. What would that do for you? It might free you from the binds of wondering what other people thought of you so much. Now, I tell you these questions because there is nothing special about what I do when I talk with people. I just ask questions that allow them to think back in their lives and pull out lessons that I can learn from and that they can learn from. And talking with your loved ones, giving them an opportunity to share what they went through so that they can capture those stories and pass on that wisdom, not only helps them, but it also helps the future generations that can learn that wisdom. Now, something amazing happens at the end of a legacy interview. And it doesn't happen every time. I'd say probably about 60 to 70% of the time, is that we're standing up. We've just gotten to know each other for hours. We've talked about really important things. We've laughed. We've had this wonderful experience. And we stand up, and as we're leaving, men and women, they'll either touch my arm or my shoulder, and they'll motion to the painting. And they'll say, you know what? She actually doesn't look tired. She looks focused. Or she doesn't look like she's beaten down. She looks determined. And this has been the most profound realization for me since starting doing legacy interviews. It is that the very act of telling your own stories changes what you see. And as you're thinking about mentoring some of these entrepreneurs, getting them to tell their stories so it can change what they see, getting them to hear your stories, not only will it help them by the wisdom that you're giving them, but it will also give you a chance to learn from those things. Your stories matter. And both in the context of investing into businesses and investing into your family, your stories are what will allow wisdom to be passed down far longer than land or equipment or money. Your stories will be what will allow people in the future generations, no matter how chaotic they are, to know what type of people are we? What are we capable of? And what can we do when things get crazy and out of control? So I know that we are about to go through interesting times. We've been in them for quite some time. And I would advocate that as you are going through your day-to-day activities, try and get other people to tell you their stories. Learn from their wisdom and also give them the opportunity to learn from the chaotic times in their lives. Spencer, when he invited me here, he said, I want you to make an offer to everybody so that if they decide that they're interested in legacy interviews, that it's something they can do. So I would like to offer, if anybody is interested in either doing a legacy interview for yourself or for your loved ones, I will, if anybody gets one of those in the next, I think it's about a week. I don't know here because it's January 85th here. I don't know how that'll work out, but you can use the promo code FARMER, and that'll let me know that you were here. And you can get this for your family members or yourself. Some people do them online, and many people, most people do them in our St. Louis studio, and we do them either as a half day or a full day. Or, and this was at the prompting of Zach, Zach invited me to his family's home, and we've done interviews in there. I'm going to do something very special. In the next, over the summer, I'm going to visit 3 families that are doing family gatherings. We did this once this fall, where there was a family that was doing harvest. And they decided this is when everybody's all together, so we're going to have the matriarch and patriarch do an interview. And then we'd like to have the children and the grandchildren tell some stories about grandma and granddad. And we'll put that all together and we'll record it at your house. I can't do these all the time because I can't travel, but I'm going to do 3 of these this summer. I haven't even announced it on my podcast. So if anybody here wants me to come visit your farm, write me an email and we'll get that worked out. So, go back. All right. That one? All right. So, I don't know how we're doing on time. Okay. So, I want to thank everybody for allowing me to come to your event. This has been an eye-opening experience. I will be here for the rest of the day. Thank you so much.